It was my wife's birthday when I got a call from my brother with bad news. Our dad had a stroke. My brother didn't have many details, so we had to wait for updates. I tried calling my stepmom, but I couldn't reach her for 2 days. Eventually, my brother flew to my dad's town and called to say everyone was in the waiting room waiting their turn to visit. I desperately wanted to be there to tell my dad I loved him, but I had work and kids to care for. Still, my wife and I decided to make the drive to be there, even if it was 18 hours away. As soon as my stepmom heard we were on our way, she called to try to convince us not to come, saying all the rooms at her house were taken. I reassured her that we had already rented a place nearby. My wife and I drove non-stop, eager to see my dad in recovery. Once we got settled in our Airbnb, my brother stopped by, oblivious to how exhausted we were from the drive. He casually mentioned that we weren't allowed to visit Dad for a few days since Dad would be recovering at home, saying he was worried our kids would be too loud. But my dad had told me earlier that he wanted to see us all, especially his grandkids. When we arrived, my stepmom seemed surprised, but not pleasantly so. She was preparing dinner, but had clearly not made enough for everyone, so my wife and I sat without food. At dinner, she brought up how she'd called everyone right after the stroke, which stung because she hadn't reached out to me. After dinner, I could see she was angling to get us to leave, suggesting activities we could do instead of visiting Dad, like hiking or sightseeing. I made it clear we were here for Dad, not for the attractions. The next day, we arrived at Dad's house again, and right away she started in on me, asking me to mow the lawn and haul things to the landfill. I explained that we were there to spend time with Dad, not do chores. The lawn looked fine, so I called a landscaper instead. My brother, who had been staying there the whole time without kids to care for, took offense and joined in, saying if I didn't mow the lawn, our stepmom would tell the neighbors I refused to help. It was beginning to feel like they were actively trying to keep me away from Dad. Finally, Dad and I escaped to take a short walk to the beach across the street, hoping for some quiet time together. But within minutes, my stepmom came over saying he shouldn't be outside for so long. She went on about how she hadn't slept in 2 days from constantly checking on him, though his doctors assured us he was stable. I felt trapped in a dynamic where any effort to be with my dad was met with resistance and control. Reflecting on this situation, I began to see the underlying dynamics at play. My stepmom's actions seemed driven by a need for control, insecurity, and possibly jealousy. She appeared to be guarding her role as his caregiver, and our presence may have threatened her sense of importance. By discouraging our visit, subtly excluding us from meals and assigning chores, she was establishing her dominance, almost as though reminding us who was in charge. In families, especially blended ones, territorial behavior can surface, particularly in crises. Some people fear that their place or influence could be minimized, so they try to control who interacts with the loved one. I also realized that she might feel overwhelmed with stress, but rather than openly expressing it, she projected that stress through passive-aggressive comments and unreasonable demands. My brother's alignment with her further created a feeling of being on the outside, forming an in-group that felt excluding. Ultimately, her actions seemed to reflect a blend of control, insecurity, and family loyalty that became magnified in crisis. It was a painful reminder of how, even in times of need, family tensions and insecurities can come to the surface, creating more distance instead of bringing people together.